Well, hello, folks, and welcome to Inside the Leader's Mind, where what's in the way becomes the way. I'm your host, David Susan, and I'm excited to have our guest with me today, Lisa Rangel. She aims to make the world a happier place, one fulfilling executive job change at a time. As the CEO of Chameleon Resumes, she works with executives who've been promoted, recruited, and sought after their entire career, and she helps them to do a proactive job search when life turns unexpectedly. And we're going to talk about that. She and her team are ex executive search pros who do the job handling training through that lens. Welcome, Lisa. Good to have you with me.
I'm happy to be here, David. Thanks so much for asking me.
All right, so tell me a little bit. I just want to start with what we talked about. I mentioned in the introduction here.
Mhm.
Um, you said you primarily work with executives who have been achievers. They've been promoted, they've been recruited, they've been sought after, and my understanding is they've never really proactively had to search for a job because they've been sought after. So tell me
Exactly.
a little bit about that.
It's something that's evolved over time. I've been in business since 2009, and I set out to because I was a recruiter, executive recruiter for 13 years prior to that. I set out to work with executives, and as time went on in the business, I started realizing just sort of a subset within that set, and they were people who they were achievers, as you put it. They had been promoted, they had been recruited, they had been sought after, a boss moved, so they went with them. And over a period of 10, 15, 20 years of upwardly linear success, they really never had to proactively do a job search, or if they did interview, certainly marketing documents were an afterthought. They were a box checking event, like send whatever you have in, because you were referred in or brought in by so and so. We're just going to start the process. Or it was even the interview was just sort of a box checking exercise because they were already going to be offered the job based on their reputation, who they knew, who brought them in, who referred them in, and then get to a place 20 years later, they feel like they're either not being promoted due to an M&A and they're on the wrong side of the M&A, or just it starts to become unfulfilling and there's nowhere else for them to go, or they're part of a layoff they didn't expect, or even if they did expect it, they just thought the job search was going to be a hell of a lot easier than it was. And when you start to have to do a proactive job search beyond your sphere of reputation, that is a totally different sales process, if you will, than you've ever had to do before. And it's simply a business situation that needs a solution. It's absolutely overcomable, but if you never had to do it before, it's just new, and that's just it.
It's fascinating. As you were talking, I was thinking of all the executives, people I've worked with, coached, spoken to over the years. And it's usually this individual who was a high achiever, and
Mm-hmm.
they come up and they tend to be a little bit later in their career, mid to late career. And it's fascinating how many come up to me and ask me, "Hey, I've never had to job search before. What
Right.
do I do?" And it's fascinating to me when I hear this and I realize, they have this amazing reputation, um, but it's just the timing in life, and maybe it's age, maybe it's salary, maybe it's like you said, the wrong side of an M&A, which I love that thought. Um, One of the things that people talk about now when they come up to me is they'll say, maybe I need to work on my brand.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear that a lot right now. Talk a little bit about that and why a leader's brand is important, even if they're not job hunting.
It's a great question, and in full disclosure, I was when the whole idea of branding came about. Some may debate if it was 10 years ago, some may debate if it was 20 years ago, but I was not a fan at first because
Me too.
it felt just incredibly contrived to me the
Yep.
way some people were putting it out there,
Yep.
and for me, maintaining your brand is really about staying connected with people and making sure you're each aware of each other's abilities and wins and strengths, as well as what you don't do well, because then you help each other put each other in places where your strengths are showcased. And if people are aware of what you can do and what problems you fix and what opportunities you can capitalize upon, you start to develop a reputation. To me, a brand is what people come to you for. And rising through the ranks, many of us, and I put myself in this camp, make the mistake of, well, people know my work. They see what I do. And that's okay on a certain level, but that's okay when you're part of the rank and file to just depend on people seeing you, even though you should still promote yourself. But there's at least more opportunities at the bottom and mid level, so in theory, your name gets around possibly. But as you start to rise to the top, there's fewer positions at the top. You're competing at a completely different level than you ever did before, and you are competing against fellow A-level players who also outworked everybody else just like you did to get there. So now you have to compete on a different level, and that is a new level of branding that most people aren't used to, and it is something you have to cultivate, but in a genuine way. It can't be contrived. It can't be just catchy, taglines and things like that. It really has to be what people come to know you for beyond your sphere of reputation, where you're talked about amongst connections that are 2 and 3 away from you. That's how you know your brand is developed and resonating. If it's just your first degree connections, it's almost like branding light, branding 101. When you start to be known beyond your people that's when you know your brand is working. And that's what you have to work at by promoting your wins, your outcomes, your impact, in a factually, sound way, not in a superlative braggart way. That's how you develop your brand at this level.
So, would that be if I were looking at a real brand and a fake brand?
Hmm.
Is that what you might explain the difference between it, or is it something else?
Um, I don't know if I'd say it was fake, but I think I would use more the contrived, like the word contrived, because I think a real brand is you capturing what reputationally people come to you for, and now you're putting it in a way that's promotional, tastefully promotional. And contrived is when you never seek out what people come to you for externally, or you don't value what people think of you externally, and it's just what you want to be known for, but you have no proof. And the reason why I don't say fake, I wouldn't say fake, is because the person thinks that's what they want to be known for and thinks that's what they do. So to them, it's real. But if the evidence isn't there, it's really just created or just contrived, right? It's not. You need to have the proof in order for it to really get some traction.
So, related to that, and trying to figure out what they're known for, I think a lot of people have, and I'm guilty of it. Most people I've met are, it's hard to see, what do they say? The forest through the trees, or
Right.
you can't see the picture from inside the frame, however you want to look
Absolutely.
at it.
Yeah, yeah.
How does someone, first of all, I guess two parts to the question. Do you see this a lot where people don't even realize what they're really known for at work? And the second part of that is, if so, how do they figure that out? How do they realize that this is really what my strategic, what I'm good at, because I think a lot of people take it for granted.
They do. They do. And I was also very guilty of this, throughout my career, until maybe like I had hired a coach about maybe 13, 14 years ago. And, what I do, branding people and helping them figure out what their positioning is and then showing them how to market themselves, it comes very intuitively to me. Granted, it comes from my executive recruiting experience and other parts of my life, but it does come somewhat intuitively to me. And I had a coach a number of years ago tell me, just because it comes easy to you or comes intuitively to you doesn't mean it's the same for everybody else, and it doesn't
Right.
mean that it doesn't have value to other people. So that's where I start with people is, what do you love doing that comes somewhat intuitively to you that you see has a high value, that people come to you for. And at the executive level, I often remind them that they're probably competent in many different areas, but there's probably a few things that while the story might be great on an interview or at cocktail parties, it's some stuff they never want to do again. So to help them really hone their brand at this executive level is not just focusing and figuring out what you want to continue doing that you love doing that has high value in the marketplace, but it's also diminishing, if not outright deleting, what you don't want to do anymore. Because if you're muddying the waters with everything you can do, it's hard to be known for something. But and I say delete or diminish because sometimes you have to include it in the story somewhere to show that you have a stepping stone that got you to the thing you want to continue doing. But if we can even outright delete it, we delete it, and it doesn't mean you'll never tell it on an interview or at a work event or the story. It's not that you'll never tell the story, but honing in on what you want to continue doing, that you really enjoy doing, that you're good at, and has value in the marketplace. That's when you start to really hone in on your brand. And that is what is most likely people come to know you for too. Because when you're doing that kind of work, like your passion for it just sort of oozes out without you even trying to look passionate about it, right? Like it just you see it when you work with people and they're completely like they got that face that's like completely jazzed and you can tell they're in it even if they're frustrated or they're just frustrated by figuring it out. But when they get there and they figure it out and you can tell they're just in their zone, that's the stuff that you want to encapsulate with other wins and recommendations from others, and it tells a whole story that eventually becomes your brand.
And they totally light up when they start talking about it, which is
Yes,
the coolest thing. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot with this question because
that's
if
okay.
you can't, well, well, it's not. So so I'll give you the question. I'm going to give you a little bit of background, and then I'll let you. So I'll give you a moment to think about it. But
Okay.
I want you to think about if you're comfortable sharing, and
Hmm.
nothing confidential, but if you can think of maybe a story, someone you've worked with where they were kind of blind to their own uniqueness, strength, whatever it is. And then you drew it out of them, and it's just a freaking amazing story that they were unaware of or they took for granted. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is like this is what So I'll give you an example. I interviewed this guy years ago, long time ago,
Hmm.
and I was looking at his resume, and we we're trying to find something that was unique about him, right?
Hmm.
And I get to the second page of his resume, and he worked for Ernest and Julio Gallo, and he was like an analyst. He was an executive, and it just was a job description, right? And I said, okay, walk me through this a little bit.
Hmm.
Anything unique? And he says, well, actually, there was. What I did is I was looking at sales of wine in the mid market, kind of the $10 price range. And he said, back then, there was cheap wine that didn't taste good, and then there was expensive wine, but there was really no one that had dominated in the $7 to $10 price range. And he said, so I put together, we had an executive meeting, and we were
Hmm.
looking for ideas on how to grow. And he said, I presented this chart that basically showed sales of wine and competitors in cheap wine, more expensive wine, but table wine in the $7 to $10 range, there was
Hmm.
this gap. And he said they had never seen the data presented this way. He said they stopped the meeting right then and they said, that's it. We are going to try to figure out a way to produce wine, higher quality, better tasting, but in that $7 to $10 price range.
Right.
And he said because of that, they developed a new technique of making wine
Hmm.
quickly with flavor, with not fake flavor. And he
Right.
said, and they developed turning leaf wine
Oh
because of
yeah.
the work I did. And I said, you've got to be kidding. I said, so you're responsible for that? He goes, well, no, I didn't. No, I said, but you understand, if you hadn't done the work you did, if you didn't understand how to analyze a market, they would never have developed. And he said, well, I guess I never looked at it that way. Well, Turning
That's
Leaf back in the day went on to dominate in that $7 to $10 price range back
hmm.
then. And this is the guy. And so once he had this story, he ended up having multiple job offers because the story was so compelling and
Right.
people are like, that's what I want. So Do you have any, now that I've stalled enough maybe to give
No,
you,
it's
do you have
funny. I
any?
don't have a specific story that I can offer because that person can be looked up, right? And I'm sure you have permission to use that information. But some of the stories I have would definitely, even not using a name or a company, would probably identify them. But some of the patterns I see is a lot of transformation type of examples. We work with a lot of individuals that are transforming, whether it's from, back in the day it was analog to digital, now it's digital to AI, and, using AI to streamline accounting operations. And it's not necessarily, you would think, eliminating jobs, but what this person did was get their people retrained with AI being used in the finance and accounting reporting function that streamlined the reporting, but without losing jobs. And I mean, I just think that something like that is important because so much of the buzz is AI is taking jobs, and it's about taking the time to retrain your people. And the compassionate, I find that the compassionate element of managing people, whether it's compassionate layoffs or retraining teams, taking the time to restructure people, we weave that in. So much of that gets dismissed or not accounted for. And that's exactly what's needed in the workplace today is compassionate leadership. And there's usually, and that is a common thing that people just don't give any credence to. They're just like, oh, it's not valued. Oh, it's a soft skill, and that type of leadership, when you start bringing it out of people and you start making them recognize the patterns of decisions that they've made over time, that is the actual skill set that needs to be brought out. Because if you genuinely need to let people go, and that wasn't the case with the AI accounting finance transformation I just thought of, but not having a wake of negativity for both the employee and for the employer is massive. And if you have the ability to do that, I think that is something that should be brought out and the story should be told. We've had individuals that have created products, some using technology, not necessarily AI, but some using technology, drug products, sleep, individuals that have created drugs to help with sleeping that were not addictive. Just thinking of some other things, but products that help people with certain handicaps be able to have better quality of lives. Those types of scenarios that get, even if the person recognizes the magnitude, they don't know how to sell it in a way that's humble and for them, but still incredibly punctuated for just the message being delivered to the masses. Like being able to comfortably sell yourself is a skill set in and of itself too, and that is where the branding comes from, right? Like, what was the phrase I used when we were talking? Tastefully,
Relentless.
tastefully relentless, right? Like it's about promoting yourself, but in a way that is tasteful and that isn't going to make your stomach drop every time. But if it's factual and you did it, then there's nothing you're not bragging. So that's the key. So I don't really have a specific example that I feel like I wouldn't necessarily be outing someone, but we have clients who've taken companies public, brought it back private. I mean, just all different types of situational skills and experiences that, when done smoothly, it's nobody notices, but everyone notices when it doesn't
When
go
it goes
well,
well.
right?
Yeah.
But how do
Yeah.
you then focus on it going smoothly as the asset, as the win?
Yeah.
And that's really the key. And so
So,
someone isn't taking it for granted.
what do you say to leaders who feel weird about promoting themselves? That they're they figure it out, but they're just not used. You said it's a totally different skill, and let's say you're not there. It's great if you're there to help sell them,
Right.
but what do you say to leaders who feel weird about promoting themselves?
Well, I remind them that they are competing against people like themselves. They're not competing against people that didn't make it past middle management or don't have the skill set the competency presence to go forward beyond middle management. And I'm not disparaging middle management here. Lord knows everything rests on middle management's shoulders, for God's sakes. But but that in and of itself is a skill too, right? And every job is important. Having When you realize you are competing for few, it's simple economics. When I go through the simple economics of it all, I'm like, there's one C-level job for what you do in every company. There's not, it's not 15 middle management leadership roles or 150, right? So it was like, if you're competing against somebody who is probably value and work ethic wise similar to you, and now you're competing for that one job, like, how do you want to show up? That's really how that's the question you have to answer. Do you want to phone it in and do it yourself, even though that you're not a marketer, or you want to not get outside influence on how you're presenting yourself, or they may be getting outside influence. So how do you want to show up? If you say that you're one of these uber prepared, always ready, dominant type of people, but then your presentation doesn't speak to that, right? Like, it all needs to, a company has a marketing department. If you view yourself as an organization, right, the you Inc. type of thing,
Right,
then
right.
what are you putting towards marketing your brand?
Yeah.
What does that look like? It's coaching, it's um, communication skills, public speaking, the management skills that you need to manage a team, no matter what your discipline is. Obviously, disciplinary education to make sure you're always the top in your field. But it also then is, how are you presenting yourself to the world? Online, on your resume, verbally, and any other channel that is important to your industry and profession.
So what do you recommend to leaders who are not looking for a job? Should they be preparing now? Should they be building this brand? Should they be proactive? Should they be doing all those things that you just said, working on how do I promote? Should they be starting right now? Should they wait till, they're out of work, or wait till things are changing? What if you had magic wand, what would you tell them?
It goes back to the Harvey McKay, like, old school, build it before you
Swim with
need
the
it, right?
sharks. Yeah.
Build the well before you need it, right? So, and that, I think, goes for everything. But I have one client in particular who just comes to mind. He's hired us 3 different times. He started with us as a mid-level finance manager, and then went on to a CFO of a small brand, and then a CFO of a mid-level brand that went public, and then he took it, or went from public to private, and then he took another company back to being private, from public to private, and now is going on to a CEO level.
Cool.
And his mantra is being ready. And now with AI, he's had his documents done proactively all the time. So this way, when he gets a call, he can, and he was never really actively looking, he was always called, but he was able to hang up the phone and hit send, right? Because you can't say that you're ready and then go, oh, by the way, I'll get you that in 3 weeks. Like, or you send them something that looks not that great, despite what you sounded like on the phone. And
Yeah.
so I think it's about being ready. And that includes your network also, and leveraging your network, especially in a climate that's down. We're not going to be down forever, but in a down market, political capital is expended every time someone refers you. And so you don't want it to be, David's great, but just ignore the resume. Because, you don't want them to preface it. And eventually that resume is going to get passed on to people who don't know your referral source. And so, is it selling you? So, these are all different types of things that help you be ahead of the game, and building it before you need it.
So let's say you had 100 clients
Mm-hmm.
that come to you or that you work with. What percentage of those do you think have done what you're talking about? If you just have like ballpark that
Where
are,
they're doing it proactively.
yeah, they built the network, they've been thinking about it, and it was already there just in case. Out of, let's say,
Oh,
100.
fully, to people who are doing it to be prepared and have the network, I would say less than 10%.
Does that surprise you?
No, because if you've been promoted, recruited, sought after your entire career, it's hard to know of what you need if you've never needed it. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with these people. I think it's just
Right.
right. Like if you don't know that you don't even know what you don't know,
Right. Right.
and and then there's people who do this stuff, the documents at least to be prepared, not realizing what is entailed for the search and just how much networking really matters at the executive level. I'd say a common misconception is that a third party recruiter, will place them, and that's how most hires happen at the executive level, and that's actually the opposite. A small percentage of hires happen through third party recruiters, most happen through networking.
Mm.
So, it's not the field of dreams, like build it, they will come kind of thing. Like sometimes people think if they do their profile, everything's going to come to them. Those days are, you know, I wouldn't say they're over, but it used to be a lot more prolific when you built it and you could sit back like 10 years ago in like the 2015s and people would just find you. But if you do build it now and you build your network accordingly as well, then it's easier to be discovered. And now with AI and companies that are legally, I mean, there's companies doing it illegally, but taking information off the site, you want to make sure what anybody is pulling off the site to do their own analysis. Whether it's a human taking it off the site or it's an AI agent pulling information from what's out there in the wild on you, you want to make sure all that information is updated and selling you. Because if you're dormant on LinkedIn, that's what's getting pulled into any, AI agent or old school spreadsheet or anything. Or, that's what they're finding on you. And so if anyone's coming up with their own list of, short list of candidates, and you're not promoting yourself residually, just proactively on LinkedIn, whatever you have on LinkedIn now is what's getting populated into those analyst tools.
Wow.
So
So LinkedIn has a lot of influence right now.
it really, really does in ways that people
Yeah.
aren't even aware.
Yeah. So Boy Scout motto, be prepared,
Be prepared, Girl Scouts too.
plan ahead. It's kind of like I do a lot of sports analogies, and I always
That's
think
all.
of you want to get called up to the big leagues. You don't wait to practice when you're in the big leagues. You start practicing now because you
Yeah.
never know when the call's going to come, and you want to be prepared, right? So I love that. I love that.
I agree. Yeah. And, I'm a sports person too, but I also had a theater kid. So I often say to represent that audience, it's rehearsal, right? You rehearse.
It is. It's rehearsal. You plan ahead.
It's all about not
So
missing rehearsal.
a lot. Hey, you never know when you're going to
You got
be
to
the
tag all the
understudy.
audiences, the theater kids and the
You see it everywhere, and all of a sudden the understudy, you see it on
that's it.
Broadway. All of a sudden the understudy is now the star, and they're in
Exactly.
all the big shows on. My daughters are really into theater, and it's so funny. They'll say, "Oh, we're going to see this show," and the star. She was the understudy initially for so and so, and they tell me these stories, and
Yeah.
it's exactly what you're saying. It's all right. I want to shift gears. I want to talk a little bit about toward the end of this about you and your leadership style, your
Awesome.
leadership philosophy. Do you, first of all, do you have a leadership philosophy that, whether it's documented or not, but in the back of your mind, you go, "This is my philosophy of how to be a great leader."
I believe that work should support life, and I believe that when you hire adults, you let them do what they think is best, the job that you've given them, give them the tools they need, and let them use their judgment and run with it. So I'm not a micromanager, and I'm not somebody. I want people to have work support life. I don't want them to feel like they have to be at my beck and call in any way or anyone's beck and call within the company. So if we're not doing this to have a really good life, then there's really no point.
How do you balance as a leader, right? You got some goals, you've got the profit you got to be able to make to pay the bills.
Yeah.
How do you balance that and that life and make sure people are getting it done, but they're engaged, they're working 100%, but they're not burning out, but they're willing to give their all to you?
I think that's the premise of 100%. obviously everyone should always do their best, but I think working at 100% all the time is not feasible, right? So
Right.
I think the key is to find, and every task doesn't need 100%. So it's balancing, when you need downtime, but there's still some brainless work that needs to be done. That's when when you, if it's a situation where you can't fully take off, do the brainless work when you're not 100%, right? Because that doesn't need 100%. And I'm talking about like administrative or just things that certain people have to touch, but at the same time doesn't need like 100% of everything that they know how to do. I think it's about balancing the energy level with the work. I think it's also about setting realistic deadlines and doing things ahead of time, as without diminishing the work that we do at all. I also know I'm not curing cancer, so like I don't need to put these artificial deadlines that like people need to be up till midnight the day before doing. Like I don't need to do that. Like I have control over that as the leader of my company, and we set realistic expectations that allow people to have a life. Um, and I always ask people what they need, what's on their schedule, do we need to take anything off, do you need help prioritizing? Because especially when you're working remotely, I think it's hard to see if somebody's a little stressed out, because you're not seeing them at their desk in the office. So it's just being, I think, a little bit more vocal about what's happening at home. Not what's happening at home, like delving into people's personal lives, but just finding out what's going on. Like you have to allow that time to, you know, shoot the crap in the hallway if there's no hallway. If it's virtual, you got to create it, right? So I think there's just a lot of that has to happen. But I just, going from corporate to my own business, I'd say the first 3 years I got really stressed out, and I realized I was like, I can't blame the man. I'm the man, like, so I was like realizing then I have to change things. And that's when I started to put things in perspective and set more realistic deadlines and realize I do better work when I rest. So therefore that probably applies to people who work for me too, because we're all human. So, I think it is a mental shift, but we even do that with clients. Like when people are like, I'm overworked. And I'm like, okay, how much of this is because you allow it to happen? And how much of this is because you're reacting to what your culture is? Because if you don't acknowledge the parts that you're doing to your being overworked, guess what? You're going to rinse repeat it in the next job. So, that helps them sometimes realize, should they be leaving, or is it more of an internal job?
Yeah. Who in your life, you mentioned that the corporate 3 years, you've kind of had to figure it out. Who in your life do you think has influenced how you think the most, especially about leadership, about people?
Well, in terms of about people, I would say my mom. My mom is not a corporate leader. She, started off as a teacher's aide in a school system where I grew up and rose to the ranks of being an executive assistant for like an assistant superintendent of our town before she retired a number of years ago. And my mom, like, she was just beloved. She is beloved, but I meant she's thankfully still here. But I meant like was in her job. She's retired now about 10 years. And so much so that when I had my first child, I got 160 presents from my mom's friends. So, not even joking.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so my mom is really amazing at making sure people feel cared for, definitely to sometimes a fault, but if anybody's making mistakes, I would much rather make a mistake caring for somebody that isn't reciprocating than not caring at all. So I've definitely
That's
learned
cool.
how to care for people and see the human side of things. And I know that bleeds into my leadership skills and the way I handle clients, the way I handle my team, the way I just go about life. I know that is definitely something that I do day to day that I learned from my mom. In terms of being a good leader, I've had some really good bosses that, it really isn't any one person, but, I've had some really good bosses that allowed me to challenge them and that, I was promoted at 6 months pregnant, being 6 months pregnant, and it was not even an issue. And in a company that I think I was the third person to have a baby, and so I've been able to challenge people like that set policies on people getting you know paid certain ways, or as a salesperson or a commissionable salesperson, being on maternity leave and how that should work and things like that. And that only happens because you work for some really good people who, when challenged, go, "Oh yeah, that's how that should happen," And so they were not even willing to change. They just saw it and go, "Yeah, that's the right way to do it."
That's cool.
Um, and so I've had a lot of really good leaders that have showed me, that profit matters in order for you to care for other people. Like I'm definitely a compassionate capitalist. I don't think capitalism is bad, but I think just taking care of people in general is good business.
Cool. And you don't hear that from a lot of people. So that's
And
really cool.
we should. I mean, there's always going to be, I mean, just as a general thing, not even work, there's always going to be people who can't take care of themselves. But I think, and that's okay, and I hope to God I'm not one of them one day, but, I could be. But I think if you just take care of people proactively, generally speaking, in or outside of business, it's just always good business.
Kind of how the world has been for the last million years or so. It's how we survived,
Right.
helping others, taking care of others. Do you think um, your you had some good mentors or people that you saw how they did it? Do you think you are more l- what you do is more because of the way they did it, or do you think you lean more toward I don't want to be like some of the other leaders? So I'll give
Oh,
you an
I've
example.
had some bosses, that I'm like, well, that's exactly how I'm not doing this. And definitely taught me how to not do things.
Which way do you, I'm curious if you look at the
It,
scale.
it's a good, I'd say it's a 65 in favor of those that did it right, with the 35% influencing me based on how they did it wrong. It's
And
definitely
don't
not
how not
all,
to be, how not
yeah,
to be.
but mostly
Yeah,
influenced by people who helped me, who showed me how to do
yeah.
it right.
Are there any habits right now as a leader you say, I know, I got to get better. I'm
Well,
still
there's
working
one that
on it.
I was made aware of a couple of years ago, and I'm still working on it. And I've gotten better about it, but I know I still do it. I work remotely. My team, we're all on Slack, and I come up with ideas, and I go, "Oh, look at this idea! Oh, look at this idea!" And I just type it into Slack. And I came to learn that when I did that, people would drop everything and start working on that. And I'm like, "Oh no, we don't want them to do that. No, we don't want to do that." So I have to now preface it with, we have an idea channel, and I have to say this is not for immediate work. This is just an idea. We can talk about it next week. Or I have to realize there is a wake. As much as I humbly, don't want to think there's a wake when I put things in Slack or an email or talk, but I have to own the fact that there's possibly a little bit of a ripple effect when I say something, and make sure that that ripple is effective and not ineffective, or
And
efficient and
it's
inefficient.
and that's still going on. It still
Oh,
happens.
100%, yeah. Because I'm an idea person. That's, I think, one of
Yeah.
my strengths. But corralling them in a way that doesn't squash me, but doesn't lose them, but doesn't make my team go into, like, chaos is
A
very
frenzy,
important.
drop everything. Lisa, the boss she's got a new idea. We got to do it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. One of my employees, one of my assistants right now, frequently I will send something over and she drops it's the exact same thing
Yeah, yeah.
because I don't specify and she drops everything. And then I'll ask about the other thing. And she's like, well, I thought this
But
was
you
the
told me to do
priority.
this
I'm like,
thing.
no, this was just an FYI, or this was like, take care of this later. So I've had to learn that I have to be more clear if same thing and say, this is just, put this on the back burner. I sent it to you so you've got information, you can build a file so I don't drop the ball on it. Let's come back to it in a week or two, blah, blah,
Right.
blah.
And
But it's,
I've been clear with them to do that to me also. Like,
yeah,
if they're feeling crunched, then you need to say, "Lisa, you told me this last week, this yesterday, and this today. Like, what's the priority?" I'm thinking, and I'll even say to them, even tell me what you think the priority is. But, like, I don't want you feeling crunched. I just don't know it. So I've given them, the ability and the clarity to come back and push back at me to help me be clear if I'm not intuitively thinking I need to be clear. So
Do they feel comfortable? Do they feel
yeah,
free
I
doing
think
that?
so. I mean,
That's cool.
I'd like to think so, because they have told me. So,
Right.
but
So let's say, not related to this, but just in general, if your team was to come up with one word to describe you, what do you think they would say?
um, the first word that came to mind is compassionate. I think that's
That's cool.
I think that's what they would say. So I'll go with the first one, and I won't overthink it.
I like that. I like that. And that's really cool. And I don't always hear that because sometimes leaders, people that run the show, they're high achievers, they're get it done, and compassion comes secondary to performance, right? Um, and that's cool. I'm impressed.
Well, thank
So
you.
that's
I hope
good
that's
emotional
their word.
intelligence. Yeah. Well, we're gonna ask them. I'm gonna call them all
Call
today.
them
No,
all up.
just kidding. All right. So last question. I would love to talk longer, but last questions just because of time. What is a
Yeah.
question that you wish people would ask you, but they don't know to ask you? But secretly, God, you really wish they would because there's something you want to tell them.
I wish they would ask me what band I saw last or what dancing I did last.
No way. Why's
Yeah,
that?
because I love music and I love disco dancing. I have a secret thing that I will daytime disco. In my town they started daytime disco and it's like the best thing ever. And I live in a town with a lot of live music, and so I like trying to go see the bands and support live
No
music.
way. So is disco always, or is it funk, or is it something that's got a strong dance beat? What do you
I mean,
gravitate
just
toward?
I will always dance, period. But I grew up on '70s house music, and that's the sweet spot of it all.
So if you had to choose, you had to pick one, you had to pick a band, you had to pick an album, who would it be right now? You go, I love their music.
I love anything from Studio 54.
Any, okay, that's
Yeah,
pretty
Studio
fun.
54 is pretty awesome. Anything with a Studio 54 album is usually like a solid go-to if I had to pick one.
Love it, love it. So we learned something new about you we didn't know.
And that's it.
Do your employees know this about you?
They do, and I'll post it about it on like the last couple of years on LinkedIn. I'll put it up once in a while. I live by a beach on a boardwalk, and during the summer they do disco on the boardwalk, and so I'll do the whole
Oh
video
my
thing, and
God.
it's awesome.
And young people may not even know what like a disco was. Like it is hard to find dance clubs now.
But I'm going to tell you that where I am, whenever they do it, it's all ages. It really
Yeah.
is all ages. It's not just people in my demographic or older. I'm 55, but it really truly is all ages. So I think it could be a uniter.
Well, you know what? When I see this, I used to follow Faith Popcorn many years ago. She was a
Oh, I remember.
futurist.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's other people that do it too, but she talk about the cycle, right? There's these cycles,
Hmm.
and it used to be, I think it was a 25-year cycle, and I try to follow these now, and I'm trying to figure it out because you see the return of a trend that was, tube socks, and then they'll come back, or the old school running shorts, with the stripe, and they'll
Yeah,
come back,
yeah.
and disco, and you'll see it come through.
It comes
Usually, it
back.
skips
Yeah.
skips a generation or two, and it's fascinating to see younger generation discover it like it's brand new. Oh my gosh, have you? And you're like, yeah, that was when I was a
Right, right,
kid.
right. Or that's a remake from this. Or
That's the remake. That's the funniest. Dad, have you heard this song? I'm like, yeah, that was
that was
from the
sung by
80s.
so
I
and
don't
so.
know. I don't even know. All right, well, Lisa, it's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Back at
If
you.
someone wants to learn more about your services, what you do, etc., what's the best way for them to get
Can
get in
find me
touch or
on
learn more?
LinkedIn, Substack, Instagram, and then our website is chameleonresumes.com.
ChameleonResumes.com, and it's Lisa Rangel, Rangel.
Yes.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much. Such a pleasure talking to
It's a pleasure
you,
talking to you
and
too.
really enjoyed it, folks.
Same.
This is Inside the Leader's Mind. I'm David Susan. If you've enjoyed this, please share, please subscribe, let others know about it. But I really appreciate you, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Lisa, thank you again. Until
You
next
bet.
time.
You got it. Take care.